Information has emerged that may shock you. The Russian Federation and the United States may now be making a secret deal behind the backs of Ukraine and Europe. Everyone is now waiting for Donald Trump's mysterious statement about Russia on July 14th, which he loudly announced the day before. The latest comments by the United States President regarding Russia emphasize that his disappointment with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and his unwillingness to make concessions in negotiations to end the war have finally reached a turning point. Trump's anger indicates a significant change in the White House's tone, but it still does not mean that he is leaning toward a fully pro-Ukrainian position. Moreover, in Europe, there is now great concern about the recent statement by United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio after his meeting with Lavrov, in which he said that he had delivered a new peace proposal from Russia to Trump. European leaders are now concerned that Trump may try to push through a peace agreement that would force Ukraine to give up part of its own territory. But how justified are these concerns? That's what we'll discuss in this episode. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is July 12th, and we'll go through everything step by step. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, analysts have noticed that Europeans are increasingly trying to make it clear to the White House that the United States could take a dangerous path if it decides to make concessions to Russia. Let me say right away that I'm not recording this episode to cause any panic, but rather to look at things rationally. And not to have any illusions about Donald Trump's position, and especially not to be charmed by his recent statements. And now the Europeans are worried, and this is especially concerning after the statement by Marco Rubio, who, after meeting with Sergei Lavrov in Malaysia, said that the Kremlin had given Donald Trump a new vision for a ceasefire in Ukraine, which according to Marco Rubio does not guarantee long-term peace. But Trump will consider this idea. The Telegraph reminds us that Emmanuel Macron took time during his speech in Parliament this week to state that France and the United Kingdom will fight until the last minute to ensure a lasting peace for Ukraine. He stated that this is in the interests of Europe, not just Ukraine. And this, of course, was not the only bold statement of intent made by one of Kyiv's many Western allies this week. In general, there were a lot of statements this week. The day before, the so-called coalition of the willing gathered to reaffirm their unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. That's the official statement. And here, of course, we have to give credit to Europe. They really moved from words to action there. And so, realizing that Trump is unstable when it comes to supporting Ukraine. In Germany, for example, they started investing money in missile production in Ukraine. An agreement has been signed in Ukraine for the production of long-range missiles funded by Germany, and the first deliveries for the armed forces of Ukraine are expected as early as the end of this month. This was announced today by Bundeswehr Major General Christian Freuding, and according to him, we're talking about a large three-digit number. At the same time, Freuding added that this will significantly strengthen Ukraine's air defense and its capabilities in the coming weeks and months. One phrase from Freuding was a very pleasant surprise. Here's the quote. "We need weapon systems capable of penetrating deep into Russian territory and striking warehouses, command posts, airfields, and aircraft." In addition, Germany is closely coordinating with its partners on the issue of supplying Ukraine with new medium and long-range air defense systems. Germany has also been negotiating at all levels for several weeks about the possible delivery of 2 Patriot systems to Ukraine, which Germany will have to purchase from the United States. Nevertheless, he writes that often the loud European promises are of course good. But the problem is that in almost 3.5 years of full-scale war, during which Ukraine has been doing its best to repel the Russian invasion, we have heard these promises again and again. However, they have rarely been backed by actions decisive enough to turn the tide of Vladimir Putin's aggression. Since February 2022, there have been many moments when, if Kyiv's allies had seized their chance, decisive blows could have been dealt to the Kremlin's troops and military machine. From delays in delivering critically important weapons, such as tanks, fighter jets, and long-range missiles, to sanctions packages that were overestimated but not implemented. Unfortunately, the West has repeatedly failed to strike at exactly the right moment. And now, a quote will be given on this matter. But never before have the West's routine statements about solidarity, which we've heard, seem so empty and its desperately needed help so necessary as it did this week. Since spring, the Russian army has been ramping up its air attacks on Ukraine with frightening speed. On Tuesday evening, just a few hours after Emmanuel Macron's speech in London, Putin's troops launched their largest drone attack to date. According to the Ukrainian armed forces, 728 drones and 13 missiles took part in the attack. The weak support for Ukraine from Europe is comparable only to the unstable transactional support provided to Ukraine by President Donald Trump during the first 6 months of his presidency. From the ambush on Zelensky in the Oval Office in February to several cozy phone conversations with Putin to discuss normalizing relations between the United States and Russia, he turned America into an unreliable ally for Kiev. His strategy to end the war in 24 hours, as he so infamously promised during the election campaign, seems to be about trying to bring Ukraine to its knees as quickly as possible, not Russia. And now Trump is promising to make a major statement on Russia on July 14th. Now insiders are hinting that Trump might actually threaten to impose a full oil embargo on Russia. And besides, there are a few glimmers of hope that the situation could still change in Kyiv's favor. On Wednesday, Trump told his cabinet ministers that, quote, Putin, if you want to know the truth, is constantly feeding us nonsense. And for the first time since returning to the White House, Trump promised to provide Ukraine with new military aid. According to reports, the new United States president's arms package could be worth up to $300 million and include Patriot missiles and other medium-range weapons. And here Emmanuel Macron was right, reminding this week that fighting the Kremlin threat is vital for ensuring Europe's own security. But even if Trump finally imposes new tough sanctions and, together with Europe, starts supplying the full range of weapons that Ukraine constantly requests, unfortunately, we have to ask ourselves whether this will be too little and whether it will be too late. And here we return once again to the meeting between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov. Because while Trump is changing his rhetoric, his foreign minister is bringing some kind of Russian proposal to Washington. And now let me remind you that earlier the White House made it clear that any peace agreement brokered by Trump would most likely include the surrender of part of Ukrainian territory. And until today, the White House has not publicly abandoned this idea, despite the changes in Donald Trump's rhetoric. And now European leaders are concerned about how Trump might try to push through such a deal without Ukraine's consent. On the other hand, I haven't heard of any alternative European peace plan for Ukraine yet. When the Europeans met this week for the Coalition of the Willing meeting, all the talk about sending a military contingent to Ukraine came down to the fact that this would only become possible after Trump implements his peace plan with Ukraine. Trump's plan, not a European or Ukrainian one. At the same time, Segodnya writes that Trump's recent comments about Russia emphasized that his disappointment with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and his unwillingness to make concessions in negotiations to end the war has reached a turning point. Trump's anger indicates a significant change in the White House's tone, but it still doesn't mean that Trump is leaning toward a fully pro-Ukrainian position. And as the quote says, although Trump's loud statements toward Putin ease concerns that the White House will completely abandon Ukraine, they may not indicate a deep shift in favor of Kyiv. This is a warning shot aimed at Russia and Putin. But does this mean that the United States will suddenly become a major ally and supporter of Ukraine or play a more significant role than before? In Europe, it is also noted that although Trump's rhetoric has given Europe some hope for a potential change in his attitude, there is still no real evidence that the White House is taking a more pro-Kyiv position. Ukraine's Western allies still believe that Trump tends to see Putin as his main negotiating partner in any settlement, and Zelensky as the main obstacle to achieving a real peace agreement. The Patriot systems that Trump is promising are crucial for Ukraine's ability to better defend its troops and cities. However, this will not affect its ability to strike back at Russia and will not change the overall dynamics of the war. There is some unnecessary excitement caused by Trump's change in tone, but we don't see this leading to any serious actions. And finally, I want to say once again that I decided to record this episode so that there wouldn't be any unnecessary illusions or expectations regarding Trump's statements. If his rhetoric leads to the total strangulation of Russia, that will be his best presidency. But for now, as they say, it's better not to raise your expectations too high, so you don't end up disappointed again later. So I'll leave it to that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and friends if you want to support the work of this channel. You can do this financially through any donation or by becoming a sponsor. Here on the platform, and all the links and details are in the description of this video, or you can use the QR code on your screens. I appreciate your support. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.